the statement from the EFF, which is to the Speaker of the National Assembly and to the Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance. So the top line there is a request for the withdrawal of the report for the 2025 fiscal framework. I mean, is that possible at such a late stage, given that we already had a postponed budget and, with the adoption of the fiscal framework yesterday, we essentially have 30 days until that March 1st deadline? May 1st.
Look, I think it should be possible because there were a lot of procedural processes that were not followed appropriately in the Standing Committee on Finance meeting yesterday, which I was a part of. Because first and foremost, the meeting was supposed to come out with a clear statement as to whether we accept or seek to amend the fiscal framework of 2025, and that is the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Other Related Matters Act that enjoins upon us to do so. So there was a failure to do that, and we raised it consistently in the beginning of the meeting that we can't engage in a process of amending a committee report without stating clearly whether we accept or amend the fiscal framework. So there are two separate documents here. There's the fiscal framework and there's the committee report, which reflects on engagements with stakeholders and Treasury and SARS. So the confusion has been between these two documents. So the report must reflect on the committee's posture on the fiscal framework and revenue proposals. It didn't do so. We continued to amend the committee report about stakeholder engagements, and then we left with a draft that did not make that clear statement. And then we received a final report, which was ATC'd last night, which said at the end that the committee supports or accepts the fiscal framework as it stands. Now, that was done in retrospect. It wasn't done after a proposition by the chairperson to the members of the committee as to whether we accept or want to amend the fiscal framework.
So it's a procedural issue?
A major procedural challenge. And that procedural challenge has led to a lot of confusion, which is where I think Action SA made a grave fundamental legislative interpretation, because they thought that they are making an amendment to the fiscal framework by making a recommendation that is contained in the report that National Treasury must go and find alternative measures to VAT hikes within 30 days.
Right.
There's no legislation that permits that National Treasury must go and do that. But they supported the fiscal framework at the same time. So when you support the fiscal framework and fail to amend it in accordance to the Money Procedures Amendment Act, it stands, and the VAT hikes within that fiscal framework stand. So your recommendation...
So I'm just trying to follow on from you because it's complicated, the way that you're outlining it. But are you saying that Treasury has no obligation then to go and look for the money to get rid of the VAT hikes?
Absolutely. And also there's no legislation that says that you can amend the fiscal framework and revenue proposals after they've been adopted by the National Assembly.
Right.
The opportunity to amend and remove VAT hikes was yesterday at the Standing Committee on Finance. We didn't do that there. That is where Action SA supported the fiscal framework, and if they intend to support it here today as well, that means that finally that the Parliament of South Africa has adopted VAT hikes of 0.5% this year and next year. The recommendation that National Treasury must in 30 days find an alternative are inconsequential. Because National Treasury...
But there's nothing preventing Treasury from going and looking at alternatives. You're just saying that Treasury is not obliged to.
They're not obliged to. And even if they do find those alternatives, which is highly unlikely, how are they going to imprint those on a fiscal framework which was already adopted? Because there's no legislation that permits an amendment of the fiscal framework post its adoption. So we are saying that it might even be in the best interest of South Africans. We know there's a lot of anxiety around it, but as things stand, there will be VAT hikes in South Africa if this report is not brought upon review, and this procedural mishaps are a mechanism in which we can get the report back to the Standing Committee on Finance and hopefully get Action SA back to its senses.
This is on a technicality though, isn't it, Snell?
Absolutely. It's a technicality, but which is fundamentally important because it means the proper processes of the legislation that guides us as members of Parliament wasn't followed appropriately, and it was an attempt deliberately by the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance to sort of steamroll us into adopting this fiscal framework because there was a lot of blackmail going on. South Africans are waiting for a budget, people need their social relief distress grants, but the fact of the matter
those are real concerns, because if we don't adopt this budget, if it's not passed today, we're working on an old budget.
But look, yesterday we could have amended the budget and removed VAT hikes, and there were various proposals from the Democratic Alliance, from the EFF, from Umkhonto weSizwe, even Action SA, despite their mishap in legislative interpretation, which bring about alternative measures to generate the 28 billion shortfall that we were trying to get through VAT. So we could have avoided any delay, but now the VAT hikes are here. The VAT hikes will be adopted today. So this procedural mishap is an opportunity for members of Parliament to reflect on the mistakes they made in the Standing Committee on Finance yesterday and present a budget that is going to be pro-growth, pro-jobs, and not have VAT hikes which are going to affect the poor and the middle class disproportionately.
And pro-poor. But the fact of the matter is it comes down to the numbers, and they seem to have the numbers.
Look, it's going to be quite a tight race. I mean, if the Democratic Alliance sticks to its guns, which was to reject the fiscal framework as it was yesterday, and the EFF and Mkondo sees will do the same, the ANC is left with a couple of minority parties which belong to the Government of National Unity and Action SA, which would get them across the line just slightly.
Rise Mzansi is also on board, apparently?
It would get them across the line just slightly to get the simple majority they need to pass the budget. So it's going to go down to the wire. But I think engagement should continue before 2 o'clock to try and speak some sense to political parties that we still have an opportunity to amend this budget if it goes back to the Standing Committee on Finance. And we have to have those engagements. Otherwise, the people of South Africa are going to suffer. You know, in 2018, we were told that it's going to be a temporary VAT hike from 14% to 15% over a 3-year period. It's been 7 years, and now we're getting another VAT hike. So any promises of 30-day reviews are pies in the sky. We need to do it now while we still have an opportunity.
So what's going to be the process now from 2 o'clock? When this session, this joint session sits from 2 o'clock, what are the EFF's next steps? Or are you having those discussions now ahead of that 2 o'clock
We're
start?
having the discussions ahead of the 2 o'clock start. We've written to the Speaker, of course, around the procedural processes we think were violated in the Standing Committee on Finance. But if push comes to shove and we have to participate in a vote, we will do so. And we will vote in rejection of the proposed fiscal framework and revenue proposals and that committee report. And we hope that all political parties come to an appreciation of the legislation that guides us, how it was failed yesterday, and how we still have an opportunity to save South Africans from the VAT hikes.
Sinau Tambo, thanks very much indeed for coming on. The EFF's